The Family Under the Bridge by Natalie Savage Carlson. Chapter 1. Once there was an old hobo named Armand who wouldn't have lived anywhere but in Paris, so that is where he lived. Everything that he owned could be pushed around in an old baby buggy without any hood, so he had no worries about rents or burglars. All the ragged clothing he owned was on his back, so he didn't need to bother the trunks or dry cleaners. It was easy for him to move from one hidey hole to another, so that is what he was doing one late morning in December. It was a cold day with a gray sky hanging on the very chimney pots of Paris, but Armand did not mind because he had a tickly feeling that something new and exciting was going to happen to him today. He hummed a gay tune to himself as he pushed his buggy through the flower market at the side of Notre Dame Cathedral. The flowers reminded him that someday it would be spring even though it wasn't bad winter yet. There were pots of fragile hyacinths and tulips crowded together on planks in front of the stalls. There were pink carnations and oleanders in great tin pails. Most of all, there were bouquets of red beaded holly, clumps of white pearled mistletoe, and little green fir trees, because it would soon be Christmas. Armand's keen eye caught sight of a pail of broken branches and wilted flowers swept away from one stall. Annabelle was the name written over the stall, and Armand touched his black beret to the stocky woman whose blue work apron hung below her woolly coat. "By your leave and in gratitude for your generosity, madam," he said to the woman who was surely Annabelle. He piled the broken branches on top of his belongings in the baby buggy. Then he facetiously picked a sprig of dried holly from the litter and pulled it through his torn buttonhole. He wanted to look his best for whatever gay adventure was waiting for him this day. The woman who must have been Annabelle only frowned at Armand as he trundled his buggy toward the Rue de Course. Past the ancient buildings he shuffled his buggy, headed for the far branch of the Seine River. But as he entered the square in front of Notre Dame, a hand grasped his arm from behind. "Your fortune, monsieur," wheedled a musical voice. "You will meet with adventure today." Armand let go of the handle of the buggy and whirled around to face a gypsy woman in a short fur coat and full flowered skirt. He gave her a gap-toothed smile. "You, Morelli," he greeted her. "Your people are back in Paris for the winter?" The gypsy woman's dark face beamed under the blue scarf. "Doesn't one always spend the winters in Paris?" she asked, as if she were a woman of fashion. "But have you taken to the streets so early?" Armand shrugged his shoulders under the long overcoat that almost reached to his ankles. "It's back under the bridge for me," he answered. "I've had enough of the crowded corners and tight alleys and the Place Montbert, and I'm tired of sorting rags for that junk dealer. I'm ready for that adventure you're promising me." Morelli could understand. That courtyard we rent sometimes like a cage after the freedom of the long winding road, she said. But the men have found plenty of work for the winter. A city with as many restaurants as Paris has more than enough. Pots and pans to be mended. Of course the children can talk of nothing but the fields and woods of spring. "I can't abide children," grumped Armand. "Starlings they are, witless, twittering little pests." Morelli shook her finger at him. "You think you don't like children," she said, "but it is only that you are afraid of them. You're afraid the sly little things will steal your heart if they find out you have one." Armand grunted and took the handle of the buggy again. Morelli waved him away, swaying on bare feet, squeezed into tarnished silver sandals. "If you changed your mind about the bridge, you can come to live with us," she invited. "We're beyond the Halles, where they're tearing down the buildings near the Court of Miracles." Armand tramped under the black leafless trees and around the cathedral by the riverside without even giving it a glance. In the green park behind the flying buttresses, some street urchins were loitering. Two of them played at dueling, while a third smaller one watched, munching a red apple. The swordsmen holding out imaginary swords circled each other. Closer and closer came the clenched fists. Then the boys forgot their imaginary swords and began punching each other. They stopped their play as Armand went by. "Look at the funny old tramp," one cried to his playmates. Armand looked around because he wanted to see the funny old tramp too. It was It must be the droll Louis, with his tall black hat and baggy pants. Then he realized that he was the funny old tramp. "Keep a civil tongue in your head, Starling," he ordered. He fingered the holly on his lapel. "If you don't, I'll tell my friend Father Christmas about your rude manners. Then you'll get nothing but a bunch of sticks like these on my buggy." The boys looked at him with awe. Father Christmas is the Santa Claus of France. He rides down from the north on his little gray donkey and leaves presents for good children. The small boy held out his half-eaten apple. "Are you hungry, monsieur?" he asked. "Would you like the rest of this apple?" But the biggest boy mockingly punched the air with his fist. "Poof!" he scoffed. "There's no Father Christmas. He's just make-believe." "If you doubt my word," said Armand with dignity, "just take a look at the Louvre store. You'll find him on the mezzanine floor." He grinned like one of the roguish gargoyles on the cathedral. There really was a Father Christmas, and it was his friend Camille who felt the urge to work when the weather turned cold. "I believe you, monsieur," said the boy with the apple. "I saw Father Christmas outside the store yesterday. He was eating hot chestnuts on the street." Armand hunched his shoulders and quickly walked toward the bridge. Morelli was right. These starlings would steal your heart if you didn't keep it well hidden. And he wanted nothing to do with children. They meant homes and responsibility and regular work, all the things he had turned his back on so long ago, and he was looking for adventure. Down a few blocks was the bridge under which he lived when the weather wasn't too raw. And plenty of company he had during the summer, with all the homeless of Paris staking their claims to this space or that. "But first I must have dinner," he told himself, looking up at the restaurant across the street. He licked his thumb and held it up. "The wind is just right," he decided. So he parked his buggy beside the low wall and settled himself in the breeze that came from the restaurant. He pulled all the kitchen smells deep into his lungs. "Ah, steak broiled over charcoal," he gloated. "And the sauce is just right, but they scorched the potatoes." For 2 hours Armand sat on the curb enjoying the food smells, because that is the length of time a Frenchman allows himself for lunch in the middle of the day. Then he daintily whipped his whiskered lips with his cuff and rose to his knobby shoes. "And just keep the change, waiter," he said generously, although there wasn't a white uniformed waiter in sight. "You'll need it for Christmas." He started down the steps that dropped from the street to the quay beside the Seine. He bounced the back wheels of the buggy down each step. I am really quite stuffed," he told himself, "but I wish I had taken that apple. It would have been the right dessert for such a rich sauce." Down the quay he pushed the buggy toward the bridge tunnel that ran along the shore. On the cobbled quay a man was washing his car with the free Seine water. A woman in a fur coat was airing her French poodle. A long barge, sleek as a black seal, slid through the river. It was like coming home after a long absence, thought Armand, and anything exciting could happen under a Paris bridge. As he neared the tunnel, his eyes widened with surprise and anger. A gray canvas was propped over the niche that had always been his own, and a market pushcart was parked by the pillar. He raced his buggy across the cobblestones toward the arch. When he arrived there, he reached up and angrily tore down the canvas with one swoop of his arm. Then he jumped back in surprise and in horror. "Oh, la, la," he cried, "starlings, a nest full of them," because 3 startled children, snuggled into a worn quilt, looked up at him with eyes as surprised as his own. The little girl and the boy cowered deeper into the quilt. But the older girl quickly jumped to her feet. She had direct blue eyes, and they matched her determined chin and snub nose and bright red hair. "You can't take us away," she cried, clenching her fists. "We're going to stay together because we're a family. And families have to stick together. That's what Mama says." Chapter 2. Armand glared at the children. A shaggy dog that should have been white came bounding across the quay. It protectively jumped between the tramp and the children, barking furiously at Armand. The hobo quickly maneuvered his buggy between himself and the dog. "If that beast bites me," he cried, "I'll sue you for 10,000 francs. The girl called to the dog to her. "Here, Jojo, come, Jojo. He won't take us away. He's only an old tramp." The dog stopped barking and sniffed at the wheels of Armand's baby buggy. The man was insulted. "I'll have you know that I'm not just an old tramp," he said, and he wasn't. "I'm not friendless, and I could be a working man right now if I wanted. But where are your parents, and who are you hiding from? The police?" He studied the children closely. Redheads they were, all of them, and their clothes had the mismatched, ill-fitting look of poverty. The older girl's eyes burned a deep blue. "Our landlady put us out because we don't have enough money to pay for the room since Papa died," she explained. "So Mama brought us here because we haven't any home now, and she told us to hide behind the canvas so nobody could see us, or they'd take us away from her and put us in a home for poor children. But we're a family, so we want to stay together. I'm Susie, and they're Paul and Evelyn." The boy swaggered a little. "If I was bigger, I'd find a new place for us to live," he boasted. "It looks to me like you've already found a new place," said Armand, "and it's my old place. You've put me out of my home just like that landlady did to you." Susie was apologetic. She moved the pushcart over and measured Armand with one eye closed. Then she carefully drew a long rectangle on the concrete with a piece of soft coal. "That's your room," she said. "You can live with us." On second thought, she scrawled a small checkered square at the foot of the rectangle. "There's a window," she said gravely, "so you can look out and see the river." Armand grumbled to himself and pulled his coat tighter across his chest as if to hide his heart. Oh, this Starling was a dangerous one. He'd better move on. Paris was full of bridges, the way the Seine meandered through it. No trouble finding another one. But as he started away, the girl ran over and clutched him by his torn sleeve. "Please stay," she begged. "We'll pretend you're our grandfather." Armand snorted. "Little one," he said, "next to a millionaire, a grandfather is the last thing I hope to be." But even as he grumbled, he began unpacking his belongings. He stacked the branches and twigs and made a pile of the dead leaves he had gathered. He pulled out a dirty canvas and a rusty iron hook. He set a blackened can with a handle near the leaves. He sorted some bent spoons and knives. Last of all, he pulled out an old shoe with a hole in the sole. "Might come across its mate one of these days," he explained to the children, "and it fits me just right." The children wanted to help him. Oh, these Starlings were clever. They knew how to get around an old man. Lucky he wasn't their grandfather. But he laid his canvas over the rectangle Susie had made for him. He started a fire with the branches and dead leaves. Then he hung a big hand over the fire. Into it he dropped scraps of food he unwrapped from pieces of newspaper. "In the good old days of Paris," he told the children, "they used to ring bells in the marketplaces at the close of day so the tramps would know they were welcome to gather up the leftovers. But no more. Nowadays we have to look out after ourselves." They watched him eating his food. Even the dog that should have been white watched each morsel that went into his mouth and drooled on the concrete. Armand wriggled uneasily. "What's the matter?" he asked gruffly. "Haven't you ever seen anybody eat before?" They said nothing in reply, but 4 pairs of eyes followed each move of his tin spoon. "I suppose you're hungry," he growled. "Starlings always have to be eating. Get your tinware." Susie pulled some stained, cracked bowls and twisted spoons from the pushcart. Armand carefully divided the food, even counting in the dog. It was dark by the time the children's mother joined them. The lights of Paris were floating in the river, but the only light in the tunnel flickered from a tiny fire Armand had made. He could not see the woman's face well, but he felt the edge of her tongue. "What are you doing here?" she demanded of the hobo. Armand was angered. "And I might ask you the same, madam," he retorted. "You have taken my piece of the bridge." "The bridges don't belong to anybody," said the woman. "They're the only free shelter in Paris." Susie tried to make peace. "He's a nice, friendly old tramp, Mama," she explained, "but he's going to live with us." "I'm not a friendly old tramp," said Armand indignantly. "I'm a mean, cranky old tramp, and I hate children and dogs and women." "Then if you hate us," said Paul, "why did you give us some of your food?" "Because I'm a stupid old tramp," replied Armand. "Because I'm a stupid, soft-hearted old tramp." Oh, la, la, there it was. He had let slip that he really had a heart. Now this homeless family would surely be after that too. The mother was displeased to hear that the children had accepted the hobo's food. "We are not beggars," she reminded them. "I have a steady job at the laundry, and that is more than he can say." She went to work warming a pan of soup and breaking a long loaf of bread that she had brought with her. Armand sat in the rectangle marked by Susie and thought that this woman's trouble was pride, and that pride and life under the bridge weren't going to work out well together. By the dying light of the fire, the woman went back and forth to her pushcart, pulling out moth-eaten blankets and making bed places on the concrete. Just overhead, the automobiles roared, lights garlanded the bridge, and people walking along the higher quay laughed lightly. It could have been a million miles away from the little group under the bridge. "You ought to put the starlings in some charity home until you find a place of your own, madam," suggested Armand, after the children had dropped off to sleep. "This life is not for them. Now you wouldn't want them to end up like me, would you?" "Families should stick together through the lean times as well as the fat," replied the woman, "and I have hopes. I'm going to see my sister-in-law soon. She may know of a place for us out in Clichy." Armand stretched out his canvas without bothering about any covering. He was used to the cold. He never felt it any more. But he was sure these children would feel it. As he lay on the hard concrete, an uneasy thought worried him, like a mouse gnawing at his shoestring. Now that he had befriended these starlings, his life would never again be completely his own. When gray morning swept into the blackness under the bridge, Armand woke to find the woman gone and the three children feeding some stale bread to Jojo. "Are you still here?" asked Armand. "Don't you go to school or something today?" Susie shook her head. "We can't go to school again until we get a place to live. Mama says the teachers might begin asking us questions. Then the people will take us away from her and put us in a home." "Your mama wants you around more than I do," said Armand. "Children should go to school. Where would I be today if I hadn't gone to school when I was a starling?" "Oh, I like school," said Susie, with her blue eyes glowing. "I like to read and write. I want to be a teacher when I get big. See, a man on a barge threw this piece of coal to me, and I used it for a pencil. I hope we'll soon be able to go back to school again." "Then that's where we're different," confessed Armand. "I never did like school, but you surely must go someplace during the day. Your mama can't expect me to be a nursemaid. I've got places to go." "Oh, may we go with you?" begged Susie. "You can't go with me. That's the whole cheese of it." "Please take us, old tramp," implored Paul. "It's so cold hiding down here with nothing to do." "That's not polite, Paul," warned Susie. "Now he won't take us with him unless you apologize." "But what can I call him?" asked Paul. "I don't know his name." "What's your name, monsieur?" asked Susie. "Armand," replied the hobo. "But your last name?" asked Paul. "Ours is Calcett." Armand shrugged his shoulders. "I've forgotten," he admitted. "I think it used to be Polly or Poggy, something like that. Just call me Armand." "All right, Monsieur Armand," said Paul. "I apologize for calling you an old tramp. Now will you take us with you?" "Of course he will," said Susie quickly. "He really has a good heart, even if he looks so bad. And may Jojo go too." Armand clutched at the part of his coat covering his heart. Oh, these starlings were after it all right. "Oh, la," he explained. "And where would I be seen with 3 children and a dog?" he demanded. "What friend would want me dropping in with such a company?" Then a sly look crossed his weather-beaten face. Perhaps it wouldn't be a bad idea to take these appealing fledglings out on the street with him. No, indeed, he had a splendid idea. Of course, it wasn't just the thing of which the proud mother would approve. "How would you like to go uptown and meet my friend Father Christmas?" he asked the children. They were so astonished that they couldn't speak for a few seconds. Susie's eyes grew bluer and bluer with wonder. "Father Christmas?" she finally explained in a hushed voice. "The Father Christmas who brings presents at Christmas time?" Paul could hardly believe it. "Do you know Father Christmas?" he asked. "Mama said he won't bring us anything this year because he won't be able to find us," said Evelyn. "Then we're going right up to the Louvre department store," declared Armand, "and tell him where you're living." Chapter 3. Armand, the Paris hobo, led the red-headed children up the steps of the busy city above. His old mind, under his old beret, was busy with great plans for the children and himself. Perhaps starlings weren't too bad. They had their uses. He walked ahead, leading the way across the bridge and around Notre Dame. Susie followed with Evelyn clinging to her hand. Sometimes Paul lagged to look at something. Sometimes he ran ahead to talk with the hobo. The dog that should have been white trotted along at Susie's worn-down heels. They straggled across the bridge that tied the island to the right bank. The children turned to stare at all the fancy towers and turrets on the roof of the Hotel de Ville. "That's the city hall where they run Paris," explained Armand. "Humph! I could run it better from under the bridge." Blue pigeons fluttered around them hopefully. "Beggars!" snorted the tramp. "Always pestering folks for a handout." Jojo felt the same way. He chased away any that alighted too close to the children. "I wish we had some corn to feed them," said Paul. "See what I mean?" asked Armand. "Even people who haven't any food themselves are ready to feed the pigeons. Wish I was one." They walked through a dreary cobbled street until they reached the busy Rue de Rivoli. It was crowded with holiday shoppers. Christmas was really getting close to the business street. Vendors behind sidewalk stands were bawling out their wares and imploring passers-by to examine their merchandise. Shoppers were buying earrings and suspenders and water softeners and silk scarves from the vendors. They were buying frantically and noisily as if they might never again find anything for sale on the Rue de Rivoli. And the way they were madly buying, perhaps there wouldn't be anything left on the street the next day. Armand was continually having to turn around and coax the children along. They wanted to stop and look at everything. They stopped to stare at a mechanical soldier that a man was demonstrating on the sidewalk. The soldier marched and saluted smartly. It took some time to get Paul away from the soldier. "Cheap toy," scoffed Armand. "Take it home and it won't work, or the spring will break the first time it's wound. A friend of mine used to sell those things." No sooner had he coaxed them away from the mechanical toy than they came to a bakery shop. There was a Christmas log cake in the window, such a delicious log. It was chocolatey brown with fancy mushrooms popping from its sweet bark. Pink spun sugar roses grew out of the chocolate too, and such a real-looking ivy vine twined around it, spreading luscious green leaves. "Oh, doesn't it look good?" exclaimed Susie, licking her lips. "I could eat it all by myself," cried Paul. "I'm hungry," whined Evelyn. Armand pulled at each one in turn. "It really tastes like medicine," he said, "all but the vine. That tastes exactly like ivy, tough and bitter. I ate a Christmas log once." The children did not look as if they believed him. "It's a tricky way they have of getting children to take medicine," he insisted. They crossed the street when the policeman stopped the line of automobiles. They came to a big iron brazier where a man was selling hot chestnuts as fast as he could roast them. The air was warm around the brazier, and the smell of chestnuts was tantalizing. The children stopped and looked hungrily into the brazier. "Come, come," said Armand impatiently. "Chestnuts are wormy. Do you think Father Christmas is going to wait until midnight for us? We've still got a long way to the Louvre." But there was so much to see that the way seemed quite short. Soon they were walking through the street arcades of the store building, and it seemed that as much as was being sold outside as in, with all the push carts and street hawkers. Armand shepherded his little flock through one of the great glass doors of which the store was so proud. When the children and the dog were once inside, they felt transported into fairyland. It was warm and beautiful in the great store, with its bright lights and moving colors. There was an odor of mixed perfumes, as if the flowers in the world were blooming behind the counters that were covered with soft clothing and glittering jewels. "We have to go up to the mezzanine," said Armand. "Might as well use the elevator and save our feet for the walk back." So they went to the nearest elevator, but all the people waiting could not possibly crowd into it at the same time. "We'll have to take the steps," decided Armand. "Wouldn't you think of something of those women would stay home and do their washing and cooking?" "Our mother would if she could," said Susie quickly. They climbed the stairs. The children's eyes grew dreamier and dreamier. They saw tables piled high with toys. They were entering the domain of Father Christmas. On tiptoe reverently they followed the old hobo to the studio where a child could have his picture taken with the saint, providing his parents paid for it. Armand peeped in. The children stopped breathing. "He's not here," said the hobo in a disappointed voice. But even as he spoke, Father Christmas himself came around the counters. He was dressed in a long red robe that reached his ankles, and a curly white beard covered his chest. His mustache was waved and waxed, but his black eyes were snapping as he shook his fists at two boys running ahead of him. "And if I catch you playing with the electric trains again, I'll put you out of the store," he threatened them. The calcit children were frightened. They shrank behind Armand, and as Father Christmas approached them, Evelyn burst into frightened tears and Jojo growled. At sight of Armand, the angry lines left the forehead of Father Christmas and blithely curled around his lips. His eyes softened with pleasure and amusement. "Ho, ho, ho!" he laughed in the way that Father Christmas should laugh. "Look at whose dear old grandpapa has come to see me today." And he went on with his "ho, ho, ho" until the children were afraid he had a coughing spell. Armand pulled the little Calcits in front of him, one by one. Evelyn stopped crying and Jojo stopped growling. "You never believe where I found them," said Armand, "but they wanted to come to see you." The children's eyes were shining again. They were speechless with delight. "Have you been good children this year?" asked Father Christmas. "We've tried to be," parried Susie. "Sometimes we get mixed up about what's good and what isn't," confessed Paul. "I pulled Jojo's tail, but I won't do it any more," confessed Evelyn. Father Christmas was pleased. "I like truthful children," he said. "All the rest of them declare they've been angels all year. Now what do you want me to bring you for Christmas?" "We want a house," said Susie. "Will you please bring us a house, Father Christmas?" "Ho, ho, ho!" replied Father Christmas. "That should be agreeable to your parents. But what kind of house do you want? A doll house?" He glanced down at Jojo. "Or a dog house?" "A real house," said Paul. "A house we can live in." "With walls and a roof," said Susie. "And windows," added Evelyn. "I like to watch out the window when it's time for Susie and Paul to come home from school." Father Christmas stopped his jolly "ho, ho, ho" and stared at them. "Who ever heard of children wanting a real house for Christmas?" he asked. "What about a drum for the lad and dolls for the girls?" "No," insisted Susie. "It has to be a real house." Father Christmas rolled his black eyes around and twirled the ends of his mustache. "It will have to be dolls or games," he said. "My little donkey can't carry a house on his back, you know that." The children's faces fell, and Susie remembered her manners. "Thank you anyway, Father Christmas," she said in a quivering voice. "I guess we don't want anything but a house." "I do," said Paul. "I want something to eat. And I want a doll," added Evelyn. Father Christmas started to speak, but a pretty salesgirl interrupted him. "You better get into the studio or Monsieur Latour will fire you," she asked. "There are 4 children waiting to have their pictures taken." Father Christmas patted each red head in farewell, then he said to Armand, "Our Monsieur Latour is looking for a night watchman for a friend's building. Want the job?" "Oh, la, la!" exclaimed Armand. "I didn't come here to ask Father Christmas for a job. Goodbye, Camilla." He led the children down the steps again, but now they were strangely silent. Even Jojo's ears drooped and his tail dragged. The main floor was less crowded as they walked between the counters. An elegant floor walker caught sight of the vagabonds. He hurried to them. He made a little noise as he tapped the immaculately white handkerchief peeping from his breast pocket. "Aren't you in the wrong store?" he asked haughtily. "I should say we're in the wrong store," replied Armand just as haughtily. "We brought our dog in here to ride the escalators, and all I see is those crowded elevators." He whistled to Jojo. "Come, boy, we'll take you over to the Printemps." Jojo growled at the haughty floor walker. The little group headed for the great glass door of which the store was so proud. They shivered as they stepped out in the cold, biting air. Chapter 4. "There's a fancy Christmas window out here you should see," said Armand to the children. He wanted to cheer them because they were so silent and forlorn. He led them to the main doors facing the Palais Royal Square. A crowd of people blocked the window, but the tramp and his companions wormed their way to the front. The children's eyes bulged. Such a grand sight they had never seen. A scroll near the front of the window said that the scene was "The Marriage of Tartine." It was truly a wedding out of a storybook. 2 mechanical figures, a man and a woman dressed in gorgeous white costumes of long ago, stood in a high pavilion. They bowed sedately to each other while music tinkled romantically. But even more remarkable was the parade of tiny figures below the lovers. They were white-caped cooks bearing wondrous dishes to the wedding feast. One carried a gaudy peacock which raised and lowered its neck in time to the tune. Another held up a great crab that clicked out the rhythm with its claws, and yet another carried a cake even fancier than the Christmas log in the bakery window. Each little cook was so proud of his dish that he waltzed around and around as he paraded. "I bet they will live in a beautiful castle after the wedding," sighed Susie, gazing at the lovely bride and groom. I'm hungry, said Paul. Me too, agreed Evelyn. The dog that should have been white was drooling on a man's shoe. A crafty look came into Armand's eyes. I bet you know the words of that tune they're playing, he coaxed. It's Dame Tertine. If you'll sing it for me, I'll get you something to eat. Paul put his hand over his mouth. Evelyn put her finger in her ears. Susie shyly shook her head. There are too many people here, she said. Then sing for them, said Armand. Don't be stupid starlings without a song in your throats. Open your little beaks and sing like canaries. So Paul pulled his hand from his mouth and began to sing in a thin but firm voice. Then Susie joined him in a sweet high tone. Evelyn took her finger out of her mouth and chirped with them. They sang like three little birds on a branch in the springtime. When they had finished 2 verses, Armand clapped hard. Then he pulled his beret off his head and held it out to one person after another in the crowd. Alms, he begged. Alms for a poor old grandfather with 3 fatherless children to clothe and feed, and an orphan dog. The people gave generously because they felt the spirit of Christmas. The coins clinked into the hobo's beret. The concert had been so successful that Armand waited until the first audience left and a new one came to look at the window. Then he and the children sang again, and again he passed his beret for coins. This might have gone on for some time, and if the haughty floor walker hadn't come out of the store to see why the crowd around the window was bigger than ever. He scolded at the quartet. On your way, he ordered them with a wave of his hand and his nose in the air. No begging in front of the Louvre. Armand did not mind leaving. His beret was heavy with francs, which he funneled into his pocket. Come, canaries, he said. You are good children. I'll treat you to pancakes. He took them around the corner to where a Breton man stood behind a stand making thin pancakes on 2 round black irons. I'll take a dozen for a starter, he ordered Armand, but he had to show his money before the Briton would pour the batter on an iron. One by one the man made the pancakes so slowly that the children thought they would die of hunger before he had made a full dozen. The smell was even better than that of the perfume in the Louvre. The cakes were bigger as scooter wheels and thin as silk. The Breton spread each one with butter and jelly, then folded it twice. Everyone got 3 pancakes. Then Jojo whined pitifully, and they remembered that he was probably hungry too. So Armand ordered another dozen pancakes. They started back, munching happily on their pancakes, but Jojo kept on whining because he had swallowed each one of his in one big gulp. When they reached a corner where a crowd of shoppers was waiting for buses, Armand suggested that they entertain the weary people with some Christmas carols. The little Cowsits were less shy this time. They sang as loud as they could, and as before the hobo passed his beret around. Alms, he begged, so a poor old man can feed his starving children. But as the coins fell into his cap, an angry fist rapped against his back. Armand was frightened because he thought it was a policeman, but it was only another man as ragged as himself. A big box hung from his neck, and in it a little monkey dressed in a red and green suit made faces through the screen. What do you mean, cutting into my territory? Demanded the man with the monkey. You're stealing my show. Armand tried to make peace. Now, don't let's cross swords, Titi, he said. There's enough of a crowd for both of us. The kind of people who like to listen to choirs wouldn't be interested in watching a monkey make faces anyway. Titi was not soothed. Children or monkeys, what's the difference? He demanded. And this is my corner. But the children did not join in the quarrel, although Jojo barked at the monkey, and the monkey made his worst face at the dog. Then the monkey gave the children a sad smile and held out its green cap to them. Oh, he wants money too, said Susie. And there's a bowl on top of the box for coins. Please give the little monkey some money, Monsieur Armand. Indeed I will not, snapped Armand. Please, please, Monsieur, begged Evelyn. The little monkey wants to buy some pancakes too. By this time, most of the shoppers had boarded their buses. Armand tried to hustle his choir away, but the children wouldn't let him leave until he had dropped a coin in the bowl for the monkey. That Titi is a fake, explained the hobo as they walked down the street. He's just using the monkey to make money for himself. And he rattled the coins in his own pocket. When they came to the chestnut vendor, he treated them again. They waited as long as they could before eating the chestnuts because the hot shells warmed their hands. Now remember, Armand cautioned the children, not a word about this to your mamma, and I'll take you with me every day. But when Madame Colset came wearily down the steps that evening, the children rushed to meet her. "I saved a pancake for you, mamma," cried Susie, digging into the pocket of her faded coat. "It's cold now, but it still tastes sweet." Paul reached into his coat pocket, too. "And I brought you some chestnuts, mamma," he said. "They're cold, too, but they'll taste good." Evelyn began to sob. "I didn't save anything for you, mamma," she wept. "I forgot." Madame Calcett hugged her. "Never mind," she said. "I've brought something for you." Then her voice grew suspicious. "Where did you get the pancake and the chestnuts?" she asked. Susie and Paul lowered their eyes. "We sang songs and people dropped money in Monsieur Ahmed's cap," said Evelyn. Madame Calcett flung the children's gifts to the ground. She angrily advanced toward the hobo, who was stretched out on his canvas. "You've turned my children into beggars," she accused. "You've been using them for begging on the streets." Now, madame," Armand tried to quiet her. "When the grand singers at the opera get paid for their songs, is that begging? I'll give you your share." But Madame Calcett was busy tearing down canvases and gathering up blankets. "I don't want any of your ill-gotten money," she retorted. "We are going to leave here," she cried to the children. "I forbid you to have anything more to do with him." The children began to wail. Even Jojo howled dismally because he seemed to sense that there wouldn't be any more pancakes on the Rue de Rivoli. Armand proudly rose to his knobby knees. "No need, madame," he said as haughtily as he had spoken to the floor walker. "I'll leave myself and save you the trouble. I know when I'm not welcome." It took him very little time to pack his baby buggy. "Don't go," cried Susie. "Please don't let him go, mamma." "He's our grandpa," sobbed Evelyn. "He's all we have but you," added Paul. But Armand thrust out his bearded chin. "You just keep your old bridge, madame," he said. "It'll be a long time until you find anything else. Goodbye, starlings." Then he bumped his buggy down the quay. He clattered it as noisily as he could so it would drown out the sound of the children's laments and the dogs howling.